Nathaniel Cole was 32 years old, and he owned almost everything a person could own. He had a company worth billions of dollars. He had a house so big that some rooms hadn't been opened in over a year. He had cars he never drove and a pool he never swam in. But at night, when the big house went quiet, Nathaniel Cole was the loneliest man in the world. He worked until midnight almost every day. His office had glass walls that looked out over gardens, fountains, and a long stone path that led to the edge of his property. From his desk, he could see the whole estate, lit up by soft yellow lights. It looked peaceful. It looked perfect. It also looked empty, just like his life. Nathaniel had grown up in a house like this one. His father had been busy building the family business, and his mother had passed away when Nathaniel was only 7 years old. There had been maids and cooks and drivers, but no one to tuck him in at night. No one to ask him how his day was. He told himself as a grown man that he didn't need those things anymore. He was fine. He had work. Work was enough. 6 months ago, he had hired a new housekeeper named Elena Reyes. She was quiet, hardworking, and always polite. She kept to herself, did her job well, and never asked him for anything extra. Nathaniel appreciated that about her. He didn't like being bothered. What he hadn't expected was her daughter. Mia Reyes was 3 years old, with big brown eyes and 2 little pigtails that Elena tied every morning. She lived with her mother in the small staff cottage behind the main house. Nathaniel rarely saw her. Sometimes he heard her laughing from far away, near the garden. Sometimes he found a crayon drawing tucked under his office door, left there by accident, or maybe on purpose. Pictures of the sun, a dog, or a house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it. He never asked about the drawings. He just placed them in his desk drawer, telling himself he'd give them back. He never did. One evening, Nathaniel was working late, as always. His laptop glowed in the dark office. Numbers, charts, emails. He rubbed his eyes and looked up, just to give them a rest. That's when he saw her. A small shape moved across the lawn below his window. At first, he thought it was a shadow, or maybe an animal. But then the shape stepped into the moonlight, and his stomach dropped. It was Mia. Alone, in her pajamas, walking across the wide, dark lawn toward the trees at the back of the property. Nathaniel stood up, so fast his chair rolled backward, and hit the wall. A 3-year-old girl should not be outside alone at night. Not in this big yard. Not near the pond. Not near the old iron fence that marked the edge of his land. His first thought was that something was wrong. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she was scared and looking for her mother. Maybe she was sleepwalking and didn't even know what she was doing. He grabbed his jacket and ran. By the time he reached the side door and stepped outside, the night air was cool against his face. He looked toward the trees and caught sight of her again, a tiny figure, moving slowly but with purpose, like she knew exactly where she was going. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She walked like she had done this before. Many times before. Nathaniel's chest tightened. How long had this been happening? Had she been sneaking out every night and nobody noticed? Did Elena know? He thought about calling out to her, about running over and picking her up and carrying her back inside where it was safe. But something stopped him. Curiosity, maybe. Or a strange feeling in his chest that told him this mattered more than he understood yet. So instead, he followed her. He kept his steps quiet on the grass, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice him. The moon was bright that night, round and silver, throwing pale light across the lawn. Mia's little pajama set, covered in tiny cartoon stars, seemed to glow faintly as she walked. She didn't look back. She didn't call for her mother. She just walked, small and steady, toward the old oak tree at the very back of the estate, the one near the low stone wall that looked out over the hills. Nathaniel had walked past that tree 1,000 times and never once stopped to look at it. It was just part of the scenery to him, something the gardeners trimmed twice a year. But for Mia, it seemed to be something else entirely. He stayed behind a tall hedge, close enough to see, far enough to stay hidden. His heart was pounding, not from the walk, but from something else, worry, and a strange kind of wonder he hadn't felt in years. What was a 3-year-old girl doing, walking alone in the dark, every night, to a tree at the edge of the world? He was about to find out. Nathaniel crouched behind the hedge, watching Mia's small figure move closer to the old oak tree. His knees ached from bending down, and the cold night air had started to creep through his jacket, but he didn't move. He couldn't look away. Mia stopped a few feet from the tree. She turned in a small circle, like she was checking that no one was watching. Nathaniel held his breath and pressed himself flatter against the hedge. For a second, he worried she had heard him. But then she turned back to the tree and kept going, unaware that anyone was there at all. He watched her walk with the calm confidence of someone who had done this many times. She wasn't stumbling. She wasn't lost. Her small feet, in soft cotton socks, moved across the grass like she knew every bump and dip in the ground. Nathaniel thought about his own childhood, growing up in a mansion much like this one. He remembered wandering the long hallways alone at night, not because he had somewhere to go, but because there was nowhere else to be. No one had noticed him slip out of bed. No one had followed him to make sure he was safe. He used to sit by the window in the east wing and watch the cars pass on the road far below, wondering what it might feel like to have someone come looking for him. Now, decades later, he was the one doing the looking. And it surprised him how much his chest ached watching this little girl walk alone through the dark. Where is her mother? He thought. Does Elena know she does this? He almost stepped forward to stop her, to pick her up and carry her back to the cottage. But something about the way Mia moved held him back. She wasn't running from anything. She was walking toward something. And Nathaniel, despite every instinct telling him to interrupt, found himself wanting to know what that something was. When Mia reached the tree, she sat down at its base, right where two big roots curled up out of the earth like natural armchairs. She tucked her knees up to her chest and reached into the pocket of her pajama top, pulling out a small object. Nathaniel squinted through the darkness, trying to see. It looked like a little tin box, the kind that might once have held mints or small candies. It was worn at the edges, like it had been opened and closed many, many times. Mia opened the box carefully, like it held something precious. Nathaniel couldn't see what was inside from where he stood, but he saw her pull out a small folded piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly, smoothing it flat against her knee. Then she looked up, not at the house, not at anything nearby, but up, at the sky, where a handful of stars had begun to appear between the clouds. And then she started to talk. At first, Nathaniel couldn't hear her clearly. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, carried away by the night breeze. He crept a few steps closer, careful not to snap any twigs beneath his shoes, until he was close enough to make out her small, clear voice.
"Hi, Daddy," she said.
"It's me again." Nathaniel froze. He had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that Mia didn't have a father around. He had seen Elena's employment papers when she was hired. Single mother was listed under her family status, with no other details. He had never asked questions. It wasn't his business, he had told himself. He paid people to work, not to share their life stories. But hearing this little girl's voice, soft and steady in the dark, talking to someone who clearly wasn't there, it hit him harder than he expected. "Today Mommy made pancakes," Mia continued, kicking her feet gently against the tree root. "I ate 3. Mommy only ate 1 because she said she wasn't hungry, but I think she was just being nice, so I could have more." Nathaniel felt something twist in his chest. He thought of all the countless breakfasts he had eaten alone in his enormous dining room, at a table built for 12 people, with only the sound of his own fork against the plate. "I also saw a butterfly," Mia said. "It was orange and black. Mommy said maybe it was a monarch. I wanted to catch it, but Mommy said we shouldn't. She said it needs to be free." Nathaniel's throat tightened. He had built an empire out of hard decisions, out of never letting emotion get in his way. He had shaken hands with world leaders and closed deals worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. And yet here he was, hiding behind a hedge in his own backyard, feeling his eyes sting with tears because a 3-year-old girl was talking about a butterfly to someone who wasn't there to listen. He wanted to look away. He wanted to walk back inside and pretend he had never seen any of this. But he couldn't move. Mia folded her hands around the tin box and looked up at the stars again, her small voice steady and full of a kind of quiet trust that broke something open in Nathaniel's chest. "I miss you, Daddy," she said. "But Mommy says you can still hear me. So I keep talking. Just in case." Nathaniel stood frozen behind the hedge, his heart pounding so loud he was sure Mia could somehow hear it from where she sat. He watched as she reached back into the little tin box and pulled out a stub of a crayon, worn down almost to nothing. She smoothed the paper across her knee again and began to draw, slow, careful lines, the way small children do when they're trying very hard to get something right. Nathaniel couldn't see exactly what she was drawing from his hiding spot, but he could see her tongue poking slightly out of the corner of her mouth in concentration, the same way children everywhere do when they're focused on something important. "I drew you a picture today," she said to the sky, holding up the paper so the moonlight fell across it. "It's you and me and Mommy at the beach. Mommy said you used to love the beach. She said you would build really big sandcastles and let me stomp them down when I was a baby." Nathaniel's chest ached. He thought about his own father, a man who had built one of the largest companies on the East Coast, but had never once taken young Nathaniel to a beach, a park, or even a simple walk around the block. His father had always been in meetings, always on calls, always somewhere else, even when he was standing in the same room. Mia carefully folded the drawing and placed it inside the tin box, right on top of what looked like a small stack of other folded papers. Dozens of them, maybe more. Nathaniel realized, with a heavy feeling in his stomach, that this wasn't the first drawing. This wasn't the first letter. This little girl had been coming out here, night after night, building a small stack of pictures and words meant for a father she would probably never get the chance to know. "Mommy says when I get bigger, I can keep these," Mia said, patting the tin box gently, like it was something alive. "She says one day I'll understand everything better. But I don't want to wait until I'm bigger. I want you to know now." She looked back up at the stars, her small face lit softly by the moon. "Do you watch us, Daddy? Mommy says you do. She says you're one of the stars now, the brightest one, watching over me and her every night." She paused, and her voice grew smaller, quieter. "But sometimes I wish you could just come home. Like, for real. Not just watching. I wish you could come sit at the table and eat pancakes with us. I wish you could push me on the swing instead of just Mommy." Nathaniel felt something break loose in his chest, something he hadn't let go of in years. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, trying to keep himself quiet, trying not to let a single sound escape. But his eyes burned, and before he could stop them, tears slipped down his face, silent and warm in the cool night air. He wasn't crying only for Mia. He was crying for the boy he used to be, the boy who used to sit by a window in a mansion much like this one, waiting for a father who never came, wishing someone, anyone, would notice he was there. He thought about all the nights he had worked late in his office, telling himself that being alone was simply the price of success. He thought about the empty dining room, the empty pool, the empty hallways of his own giant house. He had everything money could buy, and yet, watching this small girl talk to the stars, he realized how little any of it actually meant. Mia yawned, a small, tired sound, and rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. She closed the tin box carefully, tucking it back into her pajama pocket, and stood up, brushing bits of grass off her knees. "Good night, Daddy," she whispered. "I love you to the stars and back." Then she turned and began walking back toward the small cottage where she and her mother lived, her steps slower now, heavy with sleepiness. Nathaniel stayed hidden behind the hedge until she was completely out of sight, his heart still pounding, his face still wet with tears he hadn't expected to shed. He waited a long moment before he finally stood up, his knees stiff from crouching so long. He looked toward the old oak tree, standing quiet and still under the stars, and for the first time in years, Nathaniel Cole felt something other than the tired, hollow feeling he had grown used to. He felt something crack open inside him, something soft, something human, something he thought he had lost a long time ago. He didn't sleep much that night. He lay awake in his enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a small tin box full of letters to a father who could never write back, and a little girl who kept hoping anyway. By morning, Nathaniel had made a decision. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen what he'd seen. Not anymore. The next morning, Nathaniel sat at his kitchen table longer than usual, staring at his coffee without drinking it. He usually ate breakfast quickly and moved straight to his office, but today, his mind kept drifting back to the little girl under the oak tree. When Elena came in to clear the dishes, as she did every morning, Nathaniel found himself speaking before he even planned to. "Elena," he said, "do you have a minute?" She paused, clearly surprised. In 6 months, Nathaniel had barely said more than a few words to her outside of simple instructions. "Of course, Mr. Cole. Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong," he said quickly, trying to sound calm. I wanted to ask about Mia." Elena's shoulders tensed slightly, the way a mother's do when someone brings up her child unexpectedly. "Has she caused a problem? I can talk to her, make sure she stays out of the way." No, Nathaniel said, shaking his head. "She hasn't done anything wrong. I was just curious about her. About your family." Elena studied him for a moment, like she was deciding whether to trust him with something important. Finally, she set down the dish towel in her hands and took a small breath. "Her father, Daniel, passed away when Mia was about a year old," she said quietly. "He had a heart problem that nobody knew about. It happened very suddenly. One day he was fine, and 2 days later, he was gone." Nathaniel's chest tightened. "I'm so sorry." Elena nodded, her eyes distant, like she was looking somewhere far away. "Daniel worked hard. He drove a delivery truck during the day and fixed cars in the evenings, trying to save enough for us to buy a small house one day. He used to say that once we had our own yard, he'd plant an oak tree, so Mia would have somewhere shady to play when she got older." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "He never got the chance." Nathaniel felt his stomach drop as the pieces started to come together in his mind. The oak tree, the stars, the stories about the beach. "After he passed, I didn't know what to do," Elena continued. "I had a baby and no husband and very little savings. I took whatever work I could find, and eventually I found this job. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, and it means Mia has a safe place to grow up." She looked down at her hands. "I try to keep Daniel's memory alive for her, even though she was too young to really know him. I tell her stories every night before bed, about the beach, about his laugh, about how much he loved her, even in the short time he had with her." Nathaniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Does she talk to him sometimes?" "On her own." Elena looked up, surprised. "How did you know that?" Nathaniel hesitated, unsure how much to admit. But something about this conversation made him want to be honest, maybe for the first time in a long time. "I saw her last night, walking across the lawn. I followed her because I was worried about her being outside alone. She went to the big oak tree at the edge of the property, and she talked to the stars. She showed him a drawing. She had a tin box full of letters." Elena's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. "She's been doing that for months. I didn't know she went that far from the cottage. I thought she just sat on the back porch." Her voice trembled. "I'm so sorry if she disturbed you, Mr. Cole. I'll talk to her, make sure she doesn't wander that far again." "No," Nathaniel said quickly, more firmly than he intended. "Please don't stop her. I wanted to understand. That's all." Elena wiped her eyes, clearly trying to compose herself. She started doing it on her own, actually. I never taught her to do that specific thing, talk to the stars, write letters. She came up with the idea after I told her that her daddy could still see her, even from far away. I think it helps her feel close to him, even though she never really got the chance to know him." Nathaniel sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing everything Elena had shared. Then, without fully planning to, he found himself opening up in return. "My father wasn't around much either," he said softly. "He wasn't gone the way Daniel is. He was just busy. Always working, always somewhere else. My mother passed when I was 7, and after that it was mostly just me and a house full of staff." He paused, surprised at how easily the words were coming out. I think that's part of why I never really learned how to be around people. I got used to being alone. Elena looked at him with something like understanding, maybe even sympathy. That sounds lonely. It was, Nathaniel admitted. It still is most days. They sat in a quiet moment together, two people who had built very different lives out of very different kinds of loss, finding an unexpected connection in a kitchen that had always felt too big and too empty. Thank you for telling me, Nathaniel finally said. And Elena, Mia doesn't need to stop what she's doing. If anything, I'd like to help, if that's all right with you. Elena wiped her eyes again. This time, a small smile broke through. That's very kind of you, Mr. Cole. Please, he said. Call me Nathaniel. Over the next few weeks, something in the big house began to change. Nathaniel started coming home earlier from work. At first, it was just 30 minutes here and there, but soon, he was leaving the office by 6 o'clock most evenings, something his assistant had never seen him do in the 3 years she'd worked for him. He began spending time near the garden in the late afternoons, and it wasn't long before Mia noticed him. At first, she was shy, hiding behind Elena's legs whenever he came near. But Nathaniel was patient. He didn't push. He simply sat nearby sometimes, reading a book or drinking his coffee, letting her get used to him being around. One afternoon, while Elena was busy folding laundry inside, Mia wandered over to where Nathaniel sat on the garden bench. Is that a picture book? She asked, pointing at the book in his hands. Nathaniel smiled and turned the book toward her. It was actually a business report, but he had folded the cover just right to make it look interesting. Want to see? Mia climbed up onto the bench next to him, careful and a little unsure, and peered at the pages full of charts and numbers. That doesn't look like a story, she said, wrinkling her nose. Nathaniel laughed, a real laugh, one that surprised even him. You're right. It's not a very good story. Do you have a better one? Mia's face lit up. She ran back to the cottage and returned a few minutes later with a worn picture book about a bunny who couldn't find his way home. Nathaniel set his report aside and read the whole thing to her, doing different voices for each character, making her giggle every time the bunny got into trouble. From that day on, it became a small routine. Nathaniel would come out to the garden after work, and Mia would bring a book, or sometimes just herself, ready to talk his ear off about her day. She told him about the butterflies she saw, the shapes of the clouds, the songs she was learning at her little preschool group down the road. At first, she called him Mr. Cole, copying her mother. But one afternoon, while trying to say his first name, it came out sounding like Uncle Nate, and it stuck. Nathaniel didn't correct her. In fact, something about hearing those two words made his chest feel warm in a way he hadn't felt in years. He started doing small things for the family, careful not to make Elena feel like he was overstepping. He quietly had the old oak trees area cleaned up, soft grass replanted, a small stone path added, so it was easier for little feet to walk to it safely at night, along with a small solar-powered lantern nailed gently to a low branch, so the spot wouldn't be completely dark. He never told Mia he'd done it. He simply let her discover it on her own one evening, and when she asked her mother in delight who had put a fairy light by her tree, Elena had looked over at Nathaniel with a knowing, grateful smile. He also began setting aside a portion of his own money, quietly, without any announcement, into a small savings account meant for Mia's future. He told himself it wasn't a big deal, just a smart use of resources. But deep down, he knew it meant more than that. He wanted this little girl to have chances that he and, sadly, her own father never had the time to give her. One evening, Mia ran up to him with a piece of paper clutched tightly in her small hand. I made you something, Uncle Nate. She held out a crayon drawing. It showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a big house, one tall with dark hair, labeled Uncle Nate, one with a ponytail labeled Mommy, and a small one in the middle labeled Me. Above them, a sun smiled down from the corner of the page. Nathaniel stared at the drawing for a long moment, feeling his throat tighten. He had received all kinds of gifts over the years, expensive watches, rare art, invitations to exclusive events around the world. None of them had ever moved him the way this simple crayon drawing did. This is... He started, but his voice cracked, and he had to stop and clear his throat. This is the best gift anyone has ever given me, Mia. Thank you. Mia beamed, clearly proud of herself, and ran off to find her mother, leaving Nathaniel sitting alone on the bench, holding the drawing carefully like it might break. He wiped his eyes quickly, glancing around to make sure no one had seen him tear up over a child's drawing. But when he looked up, he caught Elena standing by the cottage door, watching him with a soft, warm expression, like she understood exactly what he was feeling. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Nathaniel Cole didn't feel like the loneliest man in the world. A few weeks later, on a warm summer evening, Nathaniel found himself once again walking toward the old oak tree. But this time, he wasn't hiding behind a hedge. Mia had asked him earlier that day, with the straightforward honesty only a 3-year-old could manage, "Uncle Nate, do you want to talk to your mommy and daddy too? Like I talked to mine?" The question had caught him completely off guard. He hadn't told her about his own parents. He hadn't told her much of anything about his past at all. But somehow, in the simple way children often understand more than adults expect, she had sensed something in him. A quiet sadness he thought he had hidden well. He hadn't answered her right away. He'd told her he needed to think about it. But that evening, as the sky turned soft shades of pink and orange, he found his feet carrying him toward the tree without fully deciding to go. Elena and Mia were already there when he arrived, sitting on the little stone path he had built weeks earlier. Elena looked up and smiled gently, patting the spot beside her. "She insisted on waiting for you," Elena said. "I hope that's all right." "It's more than all right," Nathaniel said, sitting down carefully beside them. Mia held up her tin box, now slightly more worn than before, filled with even more folded letters and drawings. "You can write one too," she said, holding out a spare piece of paper and a crayon. "It's easy. You just say what you want to say, and then you let the stars keep it safe." Nathaniel took the paper and crayon in his hands, feeling suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't felt during even the biggest business deals of his career. He hadn't spoken to his parents, not really, not from the heart, in over 20 years. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a breath, and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster, spilling out onto the page in a scrawl far messier than his usual neat signature on business contracts. "Mom, Dad, I don't know if you can hear me, but I wanted to try. I built the company bigger than either of you ever imagined. I have more money than I know what to do with. But for a long time, I forgot what it felt like to have a family. I forgot what it felt like to matter to someone, and for someone to matter to me. There's a little girl who reminded me. She's 3 years old, and she's braver than most adults I know. She taught me that it's never too late to open your heart again, even after it's been closed for a long, long time. I miss you both. I wish you could see who I'm becoming now. I think you'd be proud, not of the company, but of this. Of learning how to actually be here, for people who need me." He folded the paper carefully, his hands trembling slightly, and looked over at Mia, who was watching him with wide, serious eyes, as if she understood the weight of what he'd just done, even without reading a single word. "Do you want to put it under the tree?" she asked softly. "That's where I keep mine sometimes. Mommy says the roots carry the words up to the stars." Nathaniel nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He placed his folded letter gently beneath one of the oak tree's large roots, right beside a small collection of Mia's own papers, tucked safely into the earth. When he sat back up, his eyes were wet, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, the tears didn't feel heavy. They felt light, like something he had been carrying for years had finally been set down. Elena reached over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you've done for us." "For her." Nathaniel shook his head. "I should be thanking you both. I didn't even realize how alone I was until I saw Mia out here one night, talking to the sky like it was the most natural thing in the world." He looked over at the little girl, who had already moved on to chasing a firefly nearby, her laughter ringing out into the warm evening air. "She gave me my life back." They sat together as the stars slowly filled the darkening sky, 3 unlikely companions brought together by grief, by loneliness, and by one small girl's unwavering belief that love could reach further than anyone thought possible. Mia eventually came back and climbed into Nathaniel's lap without asking, resting her head against his chest as she watched the fireflies blink in the grass. "Good night, Daddy Stars," she whispered sleepily. Then, looking up at Nathaniel with a small, sleepy smile, she added, "Good night, Uncle Nate's stars, too." Nathaniel wrapped his arms gently around her, looking over at Elena, who was watching them both with warmth and quiet hope in her eyes. For years, Nathaniel Cole had believed that the biggest house, the biggest company, and the biggest bank account were what mattered most in life. But sitting there under the old oak tree, with a little girl asleep in his arms and her mother smiling beside him, he finally understood what he had been missing all along. It wasn't more money. It wasn't more success. It was simply this: someone to come home to, and someone worth coming home for.